I think it's very interesting today that the BBC ran a story with concerns about ambulance waiting times, and they were talking particularly about waiting times of about 6 hours. Well, I can confirm this. When I was, or when we were looking for an ambulance for me, when I started to hemorrhage, we were waiting for over 6 hours, and then when I went into hospital, I was kept outside the hospital for about 3 hours because my temperature had shot up to over 38. And that means I had a fever which was judged to be the sort of fever that someone who had COVID would have had. And therefore the ambulance threw open the doors, turned on the fans, took off my pajamas and tried to cool me down. My temperature did in fact drop. But what I couldn't understand was why there was a rule that it was inappropriate to do a COVID test in the ambulance to prove that I didn't have COVID and could therefore enter the hospital. Instead, I was privileged to have this rather barbarian sort of reducing of the temperature, so that in fact, when I was discharged from the hospital the following day, the hospital could claim that I had been admitted without a fever. Not technically true. Now, the BBC talked about a lady called Margaret Root, who was 82, who had a stroke. Because the ambulance delayed, and was delayed by over 6 hours, and then she was kept outside the hospital for a further 3 hours. When she finally was admitted, she was told that the medication that she could have had would no longer be efficacious. This is shocking. Now, what can we do about it? Two things. First of all, we need to make sure that the bureaucracy is working. It's not working at the moment. That one department doesn't talk to another department, one hospital doesn't talk to another hospital. I've been caught up for weeks by hospitals not talking to each other. The haematology department in the hospital that I went to said they were going to talk to the haemophilia department in Oxford, and they didn't. And as a result, I wasn't given the proper treatment that I should have had in preparation for surgery, and a week later I started to bleed. Completely predictable. But it meant that I was back in hospital taking up a bed that could have been better used by somebody else. This is about bureaucratic failure. So if the government is going to say that people who haven't had COVID tests should be persuaded to take a positive decision, if they're going to couch an order in the language of choice, in other words, not be honest about that, and then people who don't take the COVID test then threatened with losing their jobs, maybe it would be better to move these people into dealing with the backlog of bureaucracy to try and make that bureaucracy work. Because that bureaucracy would benefit from being dealt with by people who have a clinical background and who are used to dealing with clinical cases on wards. So I don't know, that's just my tuppence worth on that. But so on the one hand, I think we have to make the bureaucracy work. On the other hand, we have to improve the morale generally in the NHS, and that means we have to fund it properly. So the NHS works best when the funding from the government is about at 12% GDP. At the moment, it's at about 8% GDP. It hasn't been at that level since 1997. So that means we have gone backwards over 20 years. This is shocking. So it doesn't matter how many futile millions of pounds are injected into the NHS at the moment, it's never going to be enough. We have to have a complete transformation with the way that we are funding the NHS, and at the same time, I think that means we need to overhaul this bureaucracy. We shouldn't be employing more senior bureaucrats for the NHS. There's plenty of them. And they're not doing a very good job, or haven't done a very good job over the last 20 years, if this is the mess that we found ourselves in. What we need to do is to be encouraging more doctors and nurses to remain in the NHS, because these are the people at the cutting edge of the business. We also need to make sure that when people ring up in an emergency, I've rung up in an emergency, my partner's rung up in an emergency, fell off a roof and got nowhere. Was simply told to take 2 paracetamol, and later, thankfully, because we had access to some private medical care, we discovered that he'd broken or cracked some vertebrae and is in considerable pain even now. These things should not be happening. We should have an NHS which is reliable and which is fit for purpose. That means investment. That means treating the staff with the respect that they deserve. Now, when I was in the hospital, I realised it wasn't my job to be the best patient I could be. That meant I had to, I thought that meant I should learn every nurse's, every doctor's name. And it was a wonderful, way of occupying my time to try and learn people's names, so that I could show that I had respect for them. It's what they deserve. It's the least we can do to learn people's names, and to make sure that people realise they are individuals and that they are valued. And that's the starting point. We need to value people as human beings. So anyway, there's my little bit, bouncing off the BBC report about the crisis in ambulance provision. So please follow the channel, ring the bell. We always look forward to ringing the bell.